Once again, we welcome you to Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome back to the program Bojan Lazarevski. It's been a little while since we've had you on the program, so I'm guessing for a lot of people this is going to be their first introduction to you. Bojan, tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do.
Okay, first of all, hello. Here is already the evening, but good afternoon to the audience in the US. I remember mostly in Utah, right? So I'm happy to be back on your podcast. I believe this is the third time already. So thank you very much for inviting me again. It's my pleasure to be your guest. And for those who haven't listened or read my articles yet, my name is, as you introduced me, Bojan Lazarevski. I've been writing with Young Voices for a year and a half now on several topics, but mostly focused on European and regional policies. And today I'm tuning in from North Macedonia, as usually actually when I'm talking with you, which is interesting because I'm normally abroad quite often.
Let's talk about the European Union's new Digital Markets Act, or DMA. And I know you've just written an excellent article on this. You mentioned that this is based in the best of intentions, but there are some inherent problems with this that could be corrected if they would get on them quickly. Let's talk about some of the strengths of the DMA, and then let's talk about some of the problem areas that really need to be addressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Brian. So let me first briefly mention an important law that maybe the American audience might not be very familiar with, which has been enforced before DMA. It's called the GDPR, standing for the General Data Protection Regulation. It became Europe's landmark success in protecting privacy and setting clear standards for how personal data should be handled both online and also offline. So it showed that Europe can lead the world, let's say, in a way with strong and sensible rules that put people's rights at the center of the legislation. So now when we are talking about the Digital Market Act, the DMA, we should aim for that same kind of balance, not undo it in a way. Because while the GDPR laid the ground for protecting user privacy, there are concerns now with the new DMA requirements, how this might interact with the existing rules from before. So when I wrote this piece, I started from the existing rules and their potential, which sort of set the standards quite high for future similar laws in the European Union, which can actually reflect more broadly in Europe and also globally. So what's the DMA and its strong sides? I mean, it's a new European law designed to promote fair competition primarily in the digital economy, in the digital landscape. So it focuses on large tech companies, often called gatekeepers, and it aims to stop them from giving their own services an unfair advantage, let's say, abusing the dominant positions that these companies have, or let's say blocking other competitors that maybe would enter the market. So the goal, and it's great initiative and great idea. The goal is to create more open and competitive online markets for everyone. But there are, of course, risks that come with this law.
I'm curious for startup companies, what are some of the major obstacles that would prevent them from competing? Is it when government intervenes, or is it when government stays out of the way? I'm curious.
Mm-hmm. So let's look a little bit more into the risks that this new regulation poses for the companies. There are potential loopholes which can cause consequences and do more harm than good. And this is briefly why it should be reviewed, let's say, by policymakers and improved eventually. So there's a set of specific rules for major tech companies to prevent self-preferencing. For example, Google cannot automatically set its search engine as its default on Android, let's say, or favor its own services like maps or flights. Meta cannot combine data across Facebook, WhatsApp, Instagram without user consent. Or Microsoft cannot pre-install or favor their own Edge or Bing, etc. So Amazon also wouldn't be able to rank its own products higher than third-party sellers. And Apple, on the other hand, has to allow users to install apps outside the App Store. So at the same time, DMA requires these companies to grant third parties access to some technologies and data, and which in theory promotes competition. But this, on the other hand, also raises privacy concerns and security concerns Messaging apps, for example, might have to interoperate with third-party services, which could weaken the encryption if those services don't have strong safeguards. So these interoperability requirements are the main privacy risk, I would say. And by forcing big tech companies to let other services plug into their systems, it could open some door for third parties to access sensitive user data. And this opens a lot of different problems, hacking and access, the encryption, as we mentioned. So it's a real concern because not all companies have strong privacy safeguards. And even encryption could be weakened if these connections aren't carefully managed, let's say. So Apple has warned in a document that if these rules aren't refined, they could undermine the previous mentioned GDPR protections and put at the end users' personal information at risk.
Wow. It seems like there's a balance that has to be struck between these companies, these big tech companies, being able to be innovative and proprietary in coming up with new technologies and be able to protect it, but at the same time, not do it in a way that's locking out, further interaction with others or competition. Who gets to decide that under the DMA? Who decides whether they're playing, within the rules or need to be restrained?
Yes. Well, the important thing here is that it's a new legislation. It's coming into force since 2022. So it's still a first phase of the implementation. So if we are looking for a solution, it isn't to scrap the DMA from the European Union, but to refine it. And regulators are here, those who need to strike the right balance between openness, competition, and privacy. And this means also limiting how much data must be shared and under what conditions. So we here. The European Union should also work closely with privacy experts, tech companies as well, and civil society to prevent these loopholes, let's say. So by doing so, the EU can protect at the end users, support innovation, and maintain, if we can say, the global leadership in digital privacy by turning the DMA into a tool that can truly be behind the competition, the citizens. So I would say there are a lot of stakeholders that can be included at this moment and work together how to improve it. So not to scrap the DMA completely, because as we said, it's a great initiative, the great idea behind it. But of course, during this implementation, we can see the potential loopholes that maybe people who are the architects of it weren't aware at the moment. So yeah, that's also, we have the Apple warning on the other hand, and other reactions that are coming from the civil society organizations.
Bojan, you mentioned that the European Union led out and has led out before in terms of this kind of technology regulation. Is the DMA likely to set the tone for where the U.S. might go as well? In other words, do U.S. regulators look to see?
Yes. Well, yeah, it's very possible because today these rules go beyond Europe, including to the U.S. There is still a strong transatlantic collaboration between Europe and U.S. and many U.S.-based companies operate in Europe, just as a lot of European companies operate in the U.S. Also, people from both places, both sides of the ocean, migrate and visit. So yes, it naturally can affect, and if the results are good, it can impact the legislation and the new laws that are also in the US if it's a good practice. So in practice, it could actually result for different laws, not only in Europe, because besides European Union, in other countries in the continent, but also in the US.
Yeah. All right. Once again, we are visiting with Bojan Lazarevski. He is a Young Voices contributor. And Bojan, for those who want to follow you on social media or to follow your writing work, tell us the best place we can do that.
I would say LinkedIn. Just type my name, Bojan Lazarevski. That's where I'm mostly active at the moment.
Very good. Thank you so much for your time. I look forward to our next conversation.
Thank you, Brian. It's always great to talk to you.
Welcome back to Moving Forward with Young Voices. We're happy to welcome Ben Crockett to the program. Ben, thanks for joining us today. For those meeting you for the first time, take a moment to tell us about who you are and what you do.
I'm Ben Crockett. I work at the Texas Public Policy Foundation, where I research issues surrounding housing affordability and also higher education. Brian, thank you so much for having me on the show today.
Glad to have you. And what a great topic we have. Most of my kids are through school, although I've got still one who's, just a senior in high school. But it's been fun to watch them all go through the process of applying to go to school and getting their transcripts worked out. And I'm looking at an article here you wrote for DC Journal about how Gen Z wants data on their degrees. Talk to me a little bit about where are the transcripts falling short today, the system as it currently is?
That's exactly right. What has happened is young people, students, members of Gen Z have realized what the data has been showing for a long time. And that is employers are much less likely to include college degree requirements, but also those that do are much less likely to sort those applicants by GPA. It used to be you're getting that first job out of college and, oh man, that GPA it's important. Or you're applying to law school or med school, and the GPA was a real big indicator of where you could get in. Increasingly with law school and med school, it's really the MCAT and the LSAT, right? And the same thing is true when it comes to job performance and job sort of hiring after you graduate. It's, okay, do you have internships? Can you demonstrate those skills? If there is a subject matter test, right, like there are for engineering and a couple other degrees, employers really seem to like that. But you getting a 4.0, having straight A's throughout college doesn't seem to help. And the reason is grade inflation. Back in the Vietnam era, before my time, but only 15% of grades were A's, and now it's over 75%. And if everyone gets an A, it's no longer that same indicator. So what has really surprised me about the last couple of years is you see more and more college students talking about this problem. Just in the last 6 months, several student body presidents across the Southwest signed a letter to President Trump asking him to look into solving this issue of grade inflation. And their idea was, what if we added more data on degrees, on transcripts, specifically putting the median grade of a course next to the student's own. And that gives employers, postgraduate admissions officer, the much needed context in order to say, okay, he got an A and everyone else got an A. That was an easy class. Or he got an A, but that was a really tough biology class. The average grade, the median grade was a C. This really says something about the work ethic of this applicant, of this potential employee, about the intelligence, his study. I mean, all of those contextual factors that go away when 75% of college grades are A's and B's.
Now, Ben, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment here because I feel like there's an almost certain amount of pushback that's going to come from people who would say, well, but if we make it tougher or if we show how much work went into this, essentially what we're introducing is competition back into, academics and academic excellence. And I'm playing devil's advocate. I personally don't have a problem with it, but I'm betting that there are people who would struggle with this for that reason. 75% A's is, I hate to sound like an old Gen Xer here, but that's a gold star for everyone kind of mentality.
Well, and I hear that argument, and this is something that that's one of the most common pushbacks to addressing grade inflation. And that argument is usually paired with something like the following. If everyone doesn't get an A, then who are we hurting? We're hurting insert, underprivileged group. Now, the issue with that is when you look at the data, employers aren't looking at anyone's GPA as a result of this rampant grade inflation. By introducing that competition, as you call it, what you're really doing is you're giving every student the opportunity to demonstrate their academic achievement. Whereas currently, because there's no competition, students can work really hard and can have a really tough major, and there's no recognition of that. And why would an employer say, oh, well, I know that you are different than the other 75% of students? There's no way for them to tell. And so we have to be able to say, in America, you have the opportunity to prove yourself in our higher education system.
See, now I'm wishing I had chosen another word, to describe competition, because I was the next word I was going to use was going to be merit. But again, it's that return to, but this is what I actually had to do, which I think is a wonderful idea. Tell me, throughout higher education, is this an idea that is gaining acceptance, or is there kind of an entrenchment in the now we've got to be fair mindset?
Yes and no, right? So you look at universities like Dartmouth College. They've included the median grade on students' transcripts since the mid-1990s. There's been a number of other schools that have either moved to include the median grade on transcripts, but more commonly, a university will say, we're going to form a faculty committee, and we're going to develop, as part of this faculty committee, the procedure to implement this plan. And then 2 years go by, and the committee is still meeting. I'm a Methodist, and so the joke is you find 12 people to do the work of one. That's a Methodist committee, and academic committees are the same way. You get a lot of faculty together to talk about what you want to do. And sometimes, I'll admit, things do come out of that. But for a lot of schools that have explored this, it hasn't made it past the plan stage. And what I think makes the students' idea so compelling is it puts just a little bit of pressure on universities to go from, we're talking about grade inflation, we're talking about the issues in higher education surrounding our current transcription process, and this just pushes them over the edge and says, well, now we're going to start implementing solutions.
There's a line in your article here about, this isn't to cure every ill in higher education, but it will transform the transcript from monopoly money into a usable credential. I love the imagery of that too, because that really is, that's part of a person's capital is their experience, their talents, their efforts, their skills, and what they've learned. Powerful stuff. For people who want to get better informed on this, point us in the right direction, Ben. Where would you recommend they go to do deeper research?
Well, there's an excellent research paper up on texaspolicy.com that explores grade inflation in more detail. And unfortunately, I don't have the exact URL, but you can go to texaspolicy.com, type in grade inflation into the search bar, and find all of our material on this issue and others.
All right. Again, we've been talking with Ben Crockett. He is a Texas-based education and housing policy researcher and communicator, and also a contributor to Young Voices. Where can we find you on social media?
@CrockettBen is my handle for basically everything: X, Instagram, Facebook, all of the LinkedIn even probably. So, Brian, thank you so much for having me on today. It's been a real pleasure doing your show.
Thank you. And we are back on Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome MacKenzie France back to the program. Great to have you back on the show. I know we've had you on before, but for those who are meeting you for the first time, MacKenzie, take a moment. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Brian. It is a real pleasure to be back talking about such an important issue. My name is MacKenzie France. I work at a think tank in the UK called the Pinsker Centre, and we focus on the Middle East and international affairs more generally. We're an educational charity as well.
So I know that October 7th has come and gone, and that is a date that people increasingly hold their breath as it comes and goes because of what it represents from just a couple of years back. But talk to me a little bit about the attack that took place on Yom Kippur. That was earlier in the month. I know I saw the headlines, but I'd like you to tell me, in Manchester, in the UK, there was an attack on a synagogue. Could you just kind of break down for me what happened there? And then let's talk about the larger issue of what that attack represents.
Of course. So yes, unfortunately and tragically, there was an attack at a synagogue, at Heaton Park Synagogue in Manchester, which is in the north of the UK, just before worship services were going to begin on Yom Kippur. Obviously, not everyone will be familiar that Yom Kippur is the most holy day in the Jewish calendar, and it's traditional that even Jews who don't consider themselves sort of religious, quote unquote, would still go to synagogue there. So we can obviously see that was designed to impact the most Jewish worshippers as possible. The police are still going through the motions, and a few more people have been arrested rather than just the individual who attacked the synagogue, and actually, unfortunately, two Jewish worshippers were killed. But the motive and things is slowly trickling through, and it looks like there was some connection to Islamic State, unfortunately.
Okay, now let's talk about the larger issue here. Look, the anti-Semitism has been a problem many places in the globe. The UK is not an exception to that. Talk to me about how this latest attack, or this latest terror attack, shows that the UK government is not taking seriously its duty to protect its Jewish population.
Yeah, so as you can see in the sort of article that I wrote, Brian, for a lot of us who have been watching this very closely, this attack unfortunately didn't come as a surprise. It sort of, for many of us, I think, felt like a surprise that it had taken this long for something so drastic to happen. I think what we've seen in the UK since October 7th is a slow encroaching and increasing of anti-Semitism in public life, whether that through hospitals, schools, and even attacks on Jewish places of worship. And I think that the main problem, Brian, is that it just hasn't been addressed on an institutional level. I think the reason that we've seen people get more brazen, I mean, just recently after the attack, we've seen an Oxford student actually arrested for using a chant which called to put the Zayos in the ground. And I think that level of brazenness in public is only possible when you have an institutional failure that doesn't protect and prosecute before you get to that point. So I think that's the real problem in the UK. I think sort of more things have been allowed and more things have been allowed. And that has unfortunately culminated in something horrific like this. But I think that's an institutional failure across multiple portions of the UK government, whether that be the police, whether it be the government itself, etc.
MacKenzie, forgive me for, I'm painting with a little bit of a broad brush here, but I think of the UK as being very strict on what people can and cannot say. I mean, granted, I'm getting a lot of this from social media and me. Oh, somebody was arrested because of something they said that offended someone, in the UK, and wow, that's awful. But talk to me about on the one hand, I don't want the police out there checking people out for hurt feelings. On the other hand, I don't want ugly rhetoric that is actually calling for, violence to go unchecked either. How do they strike that balance?
Yeah, and I think you've really hit the nail on the head there, Brian, with that question, because there's, I think, a concern in the UK about a sort of misplacement of resources and time. The Met Police recently announced that they were no longer going to be investigating something called a non-crime hate incident, which is sort of exactly what it says on the tin, where you wouldn't get formal criminal charges, but you still get a police interview and ascertaining motives and things like that. After a very high-profile case recently, where the Met Police arrested somebody at Heathrow Airport for a comment they'd made on the trans issue. So there's definitely the free speech concern, and a lot of us are left wondering why those are the sorts of issues that the police are willing to pursue. But when there's, as you say, a proliferation of this ugly, violent rhetoric, because I think we can all agree that the line is incitement to violence. When a lot of that is allowed to proliferate unchecked, especially, openly on the streets of London, we've seen numerous examples of not only chants, but also flags and signs that amount to what we would say is open support for prescribed terrorist organizations. And only recently we've seen a real uptick in prosecution. So you're right, of course there is a balance to be struck, but it looks to me that the police are sort of fighting on the wrong side of the issue. And a lot of the real ugly stuff that I think there would be consensus in the UK about banning and causing conviction seems to have slipped under the radar.
Are some of the trepidations being felt by Jews in the UK being felt elsewhere within the European Union, for instance? I'm just curious, is this a phenomenon? Are they seeing rising anti-Semitism elsewhere throughout Europe?
So again, it's a good question, Brian, and I think you sort of touched on it in your earlier question, which is that obviously the UK is not unique in this explosion of anti-Semitism that we've seen in October 7th. Obviously, I'm much more in contact with the UK community, but we can see similar examples in France. I think in the article I wrote, a particularly striking percentage of UK Jews, above 40%, had considered leaving recently because of a rise in anti-Semitism, and I'm sure that those figures are similar across the continent. We've seen stories of Jews leaving in France. I suppose there are perhaps some other bright spots. I think, for example, Germany has taken this a lot more seriously than other European countries, especially with the sort of open incitement on the streets and with street protests. That's been a big issue in the UK where, even on October 8th, we had protests on the street, and that have continued pretty much ever since. So I'd say that the picture is probably mixed, as it is in the UK, but definitely there are similar stories of rising anti-Semitism across the continent for sure.
All right, so talk to me a little bit about to be a free society. Can we have speech codes, or maybe I should ask first, what would constitute speech codes? Where at what point are we prohibiting free speech versus prohibiting harmful behavior? Do you understand the distinction I'm trying to make there?
Of course, and this is a big issue in the UK, and even American politicians have got themselves involved on this recently. There's been comments about the state of the free speech laws in the UK from across the US political spectrum. But I would say I think we can find consensus on this. I think the consensus should be an incitement to violence. Some of us, I think, were surprised when this Oxford student that I mentioned had been arrested for his chant calling to put the Zios in the ground. But I think anyone reading this fairly can see that is a call to violence, and there's plenty of rhetoric that goes on these marches about Israel that don't cross that line, and of course that's perfectly legitimate. But as we can see now after this Manchester attack, violent rhetoric has violent consequences, and I think we have to be honest about that.
Something that we just observed over the last weekend here in the U.S. was the No Kings protests, and one of the things that came forward in that is there were some very interesting fellow travelers that travel with that group, and I assume this is probably the same. Some of the more militant, for instance, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian types, they're very much in attendance, with No Kings, and a lot of people don't really give it a second glance. I wonder if sometimes people realize who they're keeping company with, or not.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and I think we have to remember that the sort of core of this protest movement is highly organized, highly motivated, and is willing to sort of jump on these causes as and when they see them. There probably hasn't been a sort of left of center protest in London for the past 2 years where you wouldn't have seen a Palestinian flag, and I think that this is a really sort of important point about the sort of level of takeover and presence that have been on the streets in recent years, and I think again that's an area where the police perhaps need to look again.
Once again, we are visiting with MacKenzie France. He's the director of strategy at the Pinsker Center, a think tank focused on international relations and Middle Eastern affairs. And he is also a Middle East history and peace fellow at Young Voices. Where can people find you on social media?
The easiest place to find any of my work would be on X, which is simply MacKenzie_FR.
Thanks again for your time. Great to visit with you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure as always.
Recording in progress.
Welcome back. This is our fourth and final segment today for Moving Forward with Young Voices. Happy to welcome Daniel Chang Contreras back to the program. Daniel, it's been a little while since we've had you on. For the sake of those meeting you for the first time, take just a moment. Tell us a little bit about who you are.
Well, yeah, Brian, always happy to be here. It's been a while. Yeah, so I'm part of the Dissident Project. So we are part of Speakers Bureau. People will come from other countries, in my case, Venezuela, and we talk about our life experiences and why it's important to keep American liberties and American freedoms a few more generations down the road.
Well, we've got quite a topic to discuss here, Daniel, and this is one that I've been wondering about too. I've seen the footage being shown on the news of U.S. military assets blowing up boats presumably from Venezuela, presumably loaded with narcotics. And I'm like, okay, we've got military action going on here, but I'm not really clear on what exactly this is supposed to represent. And I'm looking at an article you wrote for RealClearWorld.com that says Trump seeks cartel elimination, not regime change in Venezuela. If you would, set the stage for me, and let's talk a little bit about what we're seeing in the news and what some of the goals are that the administration has in mind.
Yeah, well, so I think the administration has been pretty clear. They are going against the Cartel of the Suns, Cartel de los Soles, Spanish, that's translation in English, which is a criminal organization led by the Venezuelan government, which is, in fact, a cartel that's masquerading as a regime, as a government. They've been in control of the Venezuelan territory for at least 25 years, first with Chavez and now with Maduro, and they have actually imposed a very bloody dictatorship back in Venezuela, back home. When I say it's, and in my article I explain it, there's been a lot of concerns about implementing military assets in Venezuela. Many people are like, well, this could end up being another Libya, Afghanistan, or Iraq. Those failed, I will say, military excursions of America in foreign lands. And my point here specifically is that in the case of Venezuela, the assets that the administration has on the area are not enough for like a wide-scale invasion. They are more targeted for military operations against the cartel that's basically the Maduro regime. And if there's any transition, which I of course hope there is, and I think there will be, it will be by the Venezuelan people who eventually lead it. It will not really be any position by the American forces in the region.
I got to say, I'm actually encouraged to hear how you describe that, because I don't like to see the open-ended military adventures, and I want our military to be used to defend Americans and defend their property and so forth. Let's talk a little bit about the background of Nicolas Maduro.
Yes,
we see him sometimes on the news, but for people who really don't know a lot about him, tell me about his background. How did he come? How did he come to power?
Yes, so Nicolas Maduro is always been part of the Chavista movement, which is a socialist movement that took power in Venezuela in 1999. Before them, Venezuela was one of the few relatively stable, for Latin American terms, democracies in the region, while Chile and Argentina had, dictatorships. In Cuba, of course, they still have a dictatorship. Venezuela was a democracy back then. 1998, Hugo Chavez wins the election, and during his first 13, 14 years, he systematically dismantles the democratic institutions and checks and balances that Venezuela had. And eventually he dies out of cancer in 2013. And Nicolas Maduro is his hand-picked successor in 2013. He wins that first election, very contested. Many people, including opposition members, say it was a fraud. Then he wins in 2018, also with fraud. And last year, he also won with fraud. Actually, last year was the most blatant fraud I think anybody has seen in the Western Hemisphere ever, if you ask me. The opposition won with 70% of the vote. The opposition had the electoral tallies showing that they won, but the Maduro regime said, well, no, I won. They didn't show any results. They actually, this is a funny part, and I don't want to get too into the weeds, but they said they won, but they haven't released the results by state. So they don't even know how many states they won, which is kind of crazy. So Nicolas Maduro ever since has led a dictatorship in Venezuela and has collapsed the economy through socialist economic measures like price control, nationalizing businesses, imposing exchange rate controls, a long list of very stupid and top-down government policies that has destroyed Venezuela and it has caused one of the largest, well, actually the largest migration crisis in the Western Hemisphere without a war and without natural disaster. So that's who's in charge. And he, of course, Nicolas Maduro, also has used narcotics and has allied himself with enemies of the United States and the Western Hemisphere just to keep himself in power.
So talk to me a little bit about Maduro. If his regime was to collapse, who's waiting in the wings? In other words, who are the other players that could take over for him?
Well, that's a great question, and that's one of the questions that probably a lot of people are asking themselves. Of course, there's forces within the Chavista regime that will probably want to take over, other people within the apparatus, political apparatus or the military. But there's one, and this is a very, and I make that point in the article, unlike Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya, there's a very legitimate and clear alternative. As I told you last year, there was an election, of course, not fair, not free, anything like that. The government did it just because they wanted some more money from the United States. And what happened here is that the opposition won with 70% of the vote. That's a whopping majority. And we're talking that there was not a fair campaign at all. So if Maduro falls and, and this targeted counter narcotics operations like really weaken his given power, which could happen, of course, and the people rebel, then there's, of course, a legitimate alternative in the face of Maria Corina Machado, who's actually the Nobel Peace Prize winner. So we have that going on. And, of course, Edmundo Gonzalez, who's actually the guy who won the election because Maria Corina Machado to run. So that will be the legitimate alternative to take power and run the country towards a very difficult transition. I'm not saying the transition would be easy or rosy, but of course, there is a legitimate political alternative, a domestic Venezuelan alternative to take power if Maduro collapses under the weight of the counter-narcotics operation of Donald Trump, which is still a counter-narcotics operation.
Daniel, I have to wonder, too, about the influence of cartel money. It seems like the cartels in Mexico have become remarkably organized and well-armed to the point that they rival, some of the state and, police units. I'm just curious, will the cartels always be a player in politics regardless of who is in power because of the money influence that they wield? Or are there regimes, I think sorry, his name just escaped me, in El Salvador.
El Salvador, Bukele?
Yeah. Who just takes, the hard line. I'm curious what your take is. Can they be avoided?
Well, I think they could be. And of course, but it takes a while. It's going to take tough measures, and it's going to be different for every country. I'm going to be honest, regretfully, the economic incentives are there. At the end of the day, there's a large consumer market in America that they sell, they provide hard currency, which is US dollars. And that's very attractive for a lot of people that have like pesos or bolívares or, very weak currencies. That's always attractive. So that's like an economic incentive is going to be there. But of course, it takes the government, a strong government, to curtail that. In the case specifically of Venezuela, which is, I also made the point in the article, it's a unique case because unlike Colombia or Mexico, which the government is too weak or too corrupted to totally go against the cartels, in Venezuela, the government is the cartel. So that's a very unique case, and that's why Donald Trump's approach is unique for a unique case.